Okay, I'm going to be right up front with you. This is not going to be an easy talk that we're going to have tonight. First, I want to say, for those of you who heard that Cheryl and I are resigning, it's true. We are feeling our time is up here. But like Paul Harvey says, you need to hear the rest of the story. A phrase that a friend of mine said recently really stuck with me, and I would like to share that phrase with you. God never does anything instantly, but he does many things suddenly. Boy, I do have your attention, don't I? And I want you to hear about this because I think it's really what God has been doing for quite some time. The word instantaneous means to me something that really hasn't been thought through, something that is not pre-planned, or something that has not really had a lot of thinking behind it. And that's the way our culture is. That's the way that a lot of us have operated, is just through the idea of doing something instantaneously. And that's why they can call us compulsive buyers, is because we do things instantaneously. But God does things that are sudden. But it doesn't mean that he hasn't thought about it. I mean, all of us have to kind of gear into this. And so what is happening tonight is something that God's been working on for quite some time. Let me share this with you. When you go back to the scriptures, you'll find out that the scriptures are riddled with God doing suddenlies in people's lives. For instance, Moses. Now think about Moses. Moses is quite a character. As a matter of fact, in most evangelical circles, if Moses came in to apply for a job in most churches, he would not make it through the first interview. Were you ever convicted of a misdemeanor or a felony? He killed somebody, And so God takes him out on the backside of the desert. Now notice this, for 40 years, And here's Moses wandering around. Now, from what I understand about the bushes out there in the Middle East, is that they do spontaneously combust just because it gets so hot. And so this is not a new sight to Moses, but it's one that he has seen before. But he gets curious, and you need to go back and kind of read that. Moses gets curious. You got to be careful what you get curious about in your life. And so he goes over, and then this bush starts to talk to him. Moses, take off your shoes because you're standing on holy ground. Now think about this, friends. He thinks he's going to be a shepherd for the rest of his life. He's done a pretty good job of it for about 40 years. He thinks that God is out of the ballgame. And then suddenly, God appears to him and asks him, what are you doing this weekend? How would you like to go with me on a little trip and let's rescue a couple of million people? And suddenly, now think about this, and suddenly, in a moment's time, Moses' life changes. Now, who was it sudden for? Moses. God wasn't shocked. Oh my God, I never thought I was going to do this. I mean, God had been thinking about this for centuries. So there was a plan behind what God was doing, but it was a suddenly that came into Moses' life. Another person that we can talk about, and you can just go through the scriptures and find your own examples of this, is Mary. Dear Mary, the mother of Jesus. And she's planning her wedding. I mean, she's got her life all planned out, and she thinks this is what's going to happen. And then suddenly, an angel of the Lord appears to Mary. Hey, Mary, got a plan for your life. And suddenly, her life changes. In a moment, whack, like this. I mean, can you imagine the conversation that had to go on between Mary and her mother, Mary and her father? Dad, I'm pregnant. I'm going to kill that Joseph. He goes, or she goes, Dad, it's not Joseph. Well, then who is it? Well, you better sit down for this one. It's God. Right. Do you understand? In a moment's time, everything in her life absolutely changes. Now, is God a part of this? Think so. Was it suddenly? Absolutely. Was it God? Yes. Had he been planning this? Probably since the fall. So it wasn't something that was surprising to him, but it was surprising to us. Now, here's the point, friends, that all of us have to think about. When suddenlies come into your life, what do you do with them? See, let me whisper a little secret to you. This is not going to be the last suddenly that comes into your life or mine. What are you going to do with the suddenlies that come into your life? Are you going to accelerate in growth, or are you going to stand back and say, God, I just don't believe this is you? And here's a question that needs to be formed in every one of our minds, and I don't hear from God for you. You have to hear from God for yourself. But every one of us have to ask the question, whether it's this circumstance that we're talking about tonight or other circumstances that come into your life and there's a suddenly that appears, you have to ask yourself this question: is this you, God? And then more importantly, what am I going to do with this suddenly? Because it seems to be that when God takes a suddenly and puts it in the midst of our lives, that we have the ability to grow at a very quick rate. But it's a choice. I want you to think about this choice for a minute. Because I can understand that some of you may have some real questions that are going on. What you really have to understand at this point is Moses had a choice. Moses could have said, don't think so. You know, I've got a really big barbecue going on and a couple hundred people are coming over and I don't think so. Mary could have said, it's too far beyond me. I can't grasp that kind of stuff. But both of them said yes, and their lives were never the same. So when suddenlies come into our lives, we just have to ask the question, is this you, God? Now, from my perspective, and I want you to hear this, I struggle hearing God's voice. And I've talked about it in this room I don't know how many times. You know, I get impulses or whatever you want to call it, things that go off in my heart, and I believe are the voice of the Lord. But I can say for an assurity that what I've been hearing, I can really believe, if I've heard correctly before, that this is certainly the Lord. And he is asking me to do this. Just for the fun of it, I have 5 points. Okay, this decision is about the future of this church. I believe the best days for Canyon View Vineyard Church are still ahead. Now, I want to say this too. Emotions will come and emotions will go. And when they come, you just have to kind of ride the roller coaster with me, okay? Our focus has always been, what does God want to do in the future? How can our church become better? The best word picture I can give you is a 3-stage rocket. Now, why I choose a 3-stage rocket, I have absolutely no idea, but I want to give you this word picture because I believe it's what God has shown me. That the first stage of this church, for 26 years, Cheryl and I have been used. And I don't want to sound arrogant because I know that it's been God that has done it. But I believe with his anointing upon us as a couple that we have been able to direct and lead this church in a fairly moderate and successful way. But at the end of that stage, there's nothing left. There's nothing left. And that's where I am. There's just nothing left. As a matter of fact, we were at talking about this too, and I'll go back to that in just a minute, but talking about this, this is something that I've been dealing with probably for 2 years. It's not been an easy decision at all. As a matter of fact, most of us in this room are not surprised. The only person that I've heard that has been surprised about this is a relative. And you expect that. It's like, well, where have you been? But anyway, nobody is real surprised by this. But I wrote down a phrase when I was at a leadership with the pastoral staff, and I wrote this phrase down, and it was just something that just came to me as somebody was speaking, and I wrote it down. It says, how do I lead with no passion? I've always been a passionate person. And when there's no passion, I just felt absolutely lost. And so at this end of this stage, this part, this whatever it is that's over, that God has taken and used Cheryl and I for 26, and I'll tell you more about this in a minute, 26.2 years. It'll be in August. And I've always kind of compared my life to a marathon. So now it's time for somebody else, which brings me to the second point. God has been changing leaders for thousands of years. Friends, we have a great staff and great leaders on this team. As a matter of fact, I'm going to read off the names of all these people. And as I read your name off, and if you're here tonight, staff, I want you to stand up, okay? Abelos are always first. They're the A-B-E, So Malachi, would you stand up? Oh, there you are. Peggy Adams. I think Peggy's at JUCO tonight. A lot of people are at JUCO, aren't they? Earl Alfrey, you here? Yeah. Josh Anderson, Christina Baker, Sherry Boer, Lisa Borgman, Don Bowman, Joe Butterfield, Bob Clifford, Shalane Coy, Seth Cooley, Kim Kukos, Gary Cox, John Cox. Back there, my son. Isla Crocker, Linda Doyle, Joni Fanning, Wade Hazen, Ronnie Higuera, Leslie Holshoe, Rhonda Huskins, John James, Daniel Jurgensen, Jared Johnson, Rick Carnegie, Daisy Kirtland, Barbara Kufel. All right. Kathy Lambert, Janice Lane, Heather Lehman, Betty McCain, Les McPherson, Teresa McPherson, Anthony Martinez. Anthony's back there. Tim Mayer, Charity Meinhardt, J.P. Mertens, Tim Nutting, Jerry Retz, Nate Ralston, Kim Ridgely, Nyla Southwell, Don Stellwagen, Lynn St. Peter, Laura Swanson. Got it right, didn't I? All right. Karen Teedy, Susie Vaughn, Harmony Ward, Jake Warren, Paul Watson, Jake Wilkinson, and of course, Cheryl Cox. These are the wonderful people that I've had the opportunity of working with. And friends, it's taken a great team like this team to get us to the point that we are. And God has taken us and appointed somebody else as the new senior pastor here. And I'd like to introduce him, although he is not here tonight, and you'll get to know him, and he's a wonderful man. He's out of our church, and his name is Kirk Yamaguchi. Will be our new senior pastor. Kirk is from our church, and he and his wife, Jane, moved to Canyon City 12 years ago. He has 3 kids. You'll have to help me with this. Joey, Wade is the oldest, and he's just graduated from high school, and he's going to some kind of school in Boise, Idaho, with the Vineyard up there. And then Joey is just going into high school, and then they adopted a daughter from China, 2 years old. And these are wonderful people. Now, he moved away from here 12 years ago and has been in Young Life for quite a number of years. And when he moved to Canyon City, and it was because of Jane's dad that was so sick, he called me on the phone and said, have you ever thought about starting a vineyard in Canyon City? And evidently, because he told me this story, and I'm taking his word for it, is I asked him, well, have you ever thought about being the pastor? And he said, no, he hadn't thought about it. And so I said, well, why don't you pray about that? And he did. And 12 years later, he and Jane have fostered a church down there that runs about 550 to 600 people. And in Canyon City, that's a really big church. And he's a wonderful man with a lot of passion, with a lot of gifting, with a lot of ability to teach. And he loves God with all of his heart. Now, I want to tell you how I did this, because I've actually been thinking and praying about this for quite some time. And so we as a staff were going up, as a pastoral staff anyway, we were going up to Glenwood Springs to have a retreat together. And so I called Kirk and asked him to come up and lead the retreat. He didn't know that I was pulling a coup on him, and neither did the staff. But I felt impressed to do that, and so I did. And when he came up, it was a wonderful time that we had together, and I just had this confirmation in my heart that this was the guy. So I called him on the phone after we got back, and I said, Kirk, this is what's happening in my life, and I really believe that you're the guy that's supposed to take over Canyon View Vineyard Church. And his response was, I was expecting this call, which is a wonderful confirmation to me. As a matter of fact, he'll tell you lots of stories, and some people have been asking, will it be over this summer? And he will, and I don't know what those dates are, but he will be over. And what was I just saying? Phone ended, yeah. Oh, and this is what happened. Thank you. It's good to have these people around that kind of, this is what I was saying. And he was walking the halls. Now, this is when we were first moved out here, and he'd been over here for some kind of a conference, and he was walking the halls, and he said, the Lord spoke to me and said, Kirk, this is your church. Now, he didn't share that with me back in 2001, but it does come to added confirmation that God has really been planning this out for quite some time. So Kirk, here's kind of a timeline, and I'll tell you more about this in just a moment. August 18th and 19th will be our last Sunday as senior pastors here. Right after that, we'll lay hands on Kirk, and he will become our senior pastor at that moment. And we will bless him and stand behind him and know that God is going to take this church to places that we were not able to take it. And God has done some many wonderful things. Number 3 is this. There will be a time of transition. It's not like we are resigning this week and next week we won't be here at all. We will be here through the end of August, and our last Sunday, as I just mentioned, will be August 18th and 19th. We will be available to the staff as a consultant on an as-needed basis through the end of the year. And I want you to hear this. Canyon View Vineyard will be our home church. As long as you'll allow us to worship here, we want to worship with you. And feel like we're supposed to be a part of this church. This is my next point, number 4. And this, one of the things I really want to do is just kind of speak from my heart tonight and just kind of let it all out. I didn't do much studying this afternoon. I really didn't have to. I want you to hear my heart on this. This is really bittersweet. This is really tough. It's not easy. To even come to this point, sometimes it just feels like it's been surreal.